Hi, my name is Maria. I'm in the Funeral Service program at Lake Washington Institute, and today I will do a lecture on the muscles of the face and some of the muscles of facial expression. Hope you like it, and let's get started. Let's start with our muscles of the cranium. The first muscles that we're gonna learn today are the frontalis occipital muscle, which is this belly over here, and the occipital muscle, which is in the back of our skull. These two muscles are connected by this big tendon that we call aponeurosis tendon. The function of this muscle is to contract. So when the muscle contracts, our ears and our scalp move. It could be posteriorly or anteriorly, and that would allow us to move our eyebrows, to raise our eyebrows, like this. Now we're going to talk about our muscles of mastication. So we have two important muscles. We have the temporalis muscle, which is this over here, and we have the masseter muscle, which is this part over here that covers most of the part of our mandibula. As I said before, the temporalis muscle is a mastication muscle and is known as the strongest chewing muscle that we have. This muscle will allow us to close the mandibula and will help us with mastication. The origin of the temporalis muscle is along the temporal bone, and the insertion would be in the coronoid process of the mandibula. The coronoid process of the mandibula is behind the zygomatic bridge that is over here. So the muscle will be crossed behind the zygomatic bridge and connect to the coronoid process of the mandibula. And that will allow us to move our mandibula. Now we're going to talk about the masseter muscle. The masseter muscle is also known as a mastication muscle, and this would be located along the sides of the face, and the origin is anterior 2/3 to the zygomatic arch. So the origin of this muscle will be here, and the insertion of the muscle would be in the angle of the jaw and the lower part of the ramus. Now that we know the cranium muscles and the mastication muscles, we can talk about the muscles of facial expression. Three of the muscles of facial expression are the orbicularis muscle, the corrugator muscle, and the orbicularis oculi muscle is this one over here around the eye, and the origin of the muscle will be in the frontal bone and the maxilla bone. The insertion is going to be in the eyelid of the eye. So an easy way to remember the function and to understand the function of this muscle is to imagine like something is going to poke into your eye. So you will close your eyes and then you will do that nice squint. That nice squint, that contraction is the function of the orbicularis. It is important to remember that the continual contraction of the muscle during life would affect the appearance of our skin. Here in the lateral corner of my eye, these little marks over here are known as the optic facial sulci, or better known as the crown's fit. Our next muscle is the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. This muscle is located above the eyeball over here, and this muscle would allow us to open our eyes, to close our eyes, to blink. It's a really important muscle which origin is in the deep down of the orbit, and the insertion of this muscle would be in the tarsus of the upper eyelid. The superioris palpebrae sulcus are located on the skin of the eyelid and are the result of the constant use of the levator palpebrae superioris muscle. At the medial end of the eyebrow, we have the corrugator muscle, which is this one over here. This muscle is covered by the frontalis muscle and the orbicularis oculi muscle. The corrugator muscle will bring the eyebrows together, like this. And these little marks over here are the vertical interciliaris sulci. Now let's study the muscles of the nose. Let's start with the procerus muscle. The procerus muscle is located between the corrugator and will drown the skin of the forehead inferiorly. The origin of the procerus muscle is in the inferior margin of the anterior plane of the nasal bone. The fibers extends upward and inserts into the fibers of the frontalis muscle and the skin between the eyebrows. When the procerus muscle contracts, drowns the skin of the nose and forms the transverse interciliary sulci, like this. These lines are the effect on the surface of this muscle. Now let's move into another muscle of our nose. This muscle has a long name, which is elevator labii superioris alace muscle, and is located here near to the nose. And the function of this muscle will help us to flare our nostrils, like this. We finally get into the muscles of the mouth. One of the most important muscles that we have is the orbicularis oris muscle, which is this muscle around the lips. This muscle is attached to many other muscles that allow us to move our face and our mouth in any direction we want. So let's start with the orbicularis oris muscle. This muscle, when contracts, will help us to close our lips or to pout. The origin or the insertion of this muscle would be the skin around the lips, and the effect on the surface is going to be the philtrum. This vertical groove located medially on the upper integumentary lip, this one over here. This is a natural facial marking. Our next muscle is the zygomatic major muscle, which is this one over here. The origin of this muscle would be in the posterior margin of the zygomatic bone, and the insertion is going to be in the skin and the muscles at the angle of the mouth. Another easy way to remember the location of this muscle is to remember that this muscle goes from the cheek to the corner of the mouth, and the function of this muscle is to drown the upper lip posteriorly and superiorly. The zygomatic major muscle is responsible of one of the natural facial markings on our face, which is the angulus oris eminence that is located in the corner of our mouth. This mark over here. Let's move on to the minor zygomatic muscle. This muscle over here withdraws the upper lip superiorly and laterally. The origin of this muscle is in the posterior margin of the zygomatic bone, and the insertion would be in the orbicularis oris muscle. Let's talk about this muscle between the minor zygomatic muscle and the levator labii superioris alace nasi muscle. This muscle over here is the levator labii superioris, and this muscle will elevate and extend the upper lip. The insertion of this muscle would be the orbicularis oris muscle, and the origin is going to be the orbicularis oculi muscle. Let's make a quick review of the muscles that we have in this area, the zygomatic and the maxilla area of our face, okay? There is a group called quadratus labii superioris. The first muscle of that group is the levator labii superioris alace muscle. The second muscle is the levator labii superioris, and the third muscle is the zygomatic minor muscle. The origin of these three muscles would be in the zygomatic bone and the maxilla bone. The insertion of the muscles would be in the orbicularis oris muscle and the superior margin of the upper lip between the wings of the nose and the corner of the mouth. Our next muscle is the buccinator muscle, or better known as the trumpet's muscle. This muscle would be the lateral wall of the cheek, and the insertion of this muscle, it's going to be on the orbicularis oris muscle, and the skin at the angle of the mouth. The origin of the buccinator muscle is in the alveolar process of the mandibula and the maxilla bone. The buccinator muscle is responsible for two facial marks. One is natural and the other is acquired. The first one is the angulus oris eminens, what we already talked about that one, which is in the corner of our mouth. That the major zygomatic muscle is responsible also for that one. And the other is the buccofacial sulcus. That mark will appear here in the corner of our cheek. And that is an acquired facial mark. The origin of the depressor angulus oris is along the line of the jaw, and the insertion it's in the skin and the muscles at the angle of the mouth. The depressor angulus muscle, it helps to form the natural facial mark angulus oris eminens, which is this one in the corner of our mouth. So let's make a review. The zygomatic major muscle, the buccinator muscle, and the depressor angulus muscle are responsible for the natural facial mark angulus oris eminens, which is in the corner of our lips. Now let's talk about the depressor labii inferioris, which is this small muscle here. The origin of the depressor labii inferioris would be in the chin, and the insertion is going to be in the lower lip. The depressor labii inferioris muscle is responsible for the natural facial mark, the angulus oris sulcus, which is this small line in the corner of the mouth. Now let's talk about the mentalis. The mentalis is this small muscle at the chin, and the origin of this muscle would be at the top of the mentalis, and the insertion is on the skin at the base of the chin. This muscle would move the chin superiorly like this. The mentalis muscle is a thick muscle, so this muscle will build the external projection that is known as the prominence of the chin. Like maybe this little thing over here, this is our mentalis. Let's talk about the risorius muscle. This is another muscle that helps us to move our mouth. It's this small muscle over here, and the origin of this muscle is over the masseter muscle. The insertion would be in the skin at the angle of the mouth. The risorius muscle is also part of the lateral wall of the cheek, as well as the buccinator muscle. We're in the final part of our video. We're going to review three muscles of the neck: the platysma muscle over here, the sternocleidomastoid muscle over here, and the digastricus muscle, which is going to be here. The platysma is these large and flat muscles that cover the anterior surface of the neck. The function of the platysma muscle is to depress the mandibula and the lower lip. When the platysma contracts, it looks like this. Can you see? All this part over here of our neck is the platysma muscle. And as the definition says, it depresses the lower lip and the mandibula. It's an easy way to remember the platysma muscles. Let's talk about the origin and the insertion of the platysma muscle. As we already see, the platysma muscle is a huge flat muscle that covers all this anterior part of the neck. The origin of this muscle is in the collarbone, and the fibers of the muscle extends upward and inserts into the skin, lateral the cheek, the lower lip, and the corners of the mouth. Let's move on and talk about the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The origin of this muscle is gonna be at the pit of the neck and in the sternoclavicular articulation. The fibers of the muscle then are gonna extend upward and insert into the mastoid process of the temporal bone. Two important things to remember about the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The widest part of the neck is measured from one belly of the sternocleidomastoid muscle to the other belly of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The second fact to remember of the sternocleidomastoid muscle is that serves as a guide to find the common carotid artery. Okay, our last muscle of this lecture is going to be the gastricus muscle. This muscle is located below the body of the mandible and helps to the manipulation of the tongue. The region of the digastricus muscle is going to be behind and below the incisor teeth of the mandible, and the insertion is going to be in the hyoid bone, which is this line. This line represents the hyoid bone. As I said before, this muscle will help with the manipulation of the tongue. The curves of the neck are the result of the constant use of the digastricus muscle, and those are acquired facial markings that develop during life. That's all for today's video. I hope you like it and see you next time. Bye.